Thank you very much, Shane. I'm happy for the opportunity to address my fellow Barbadians, residents, and well-wishers tonight. As we do so, every so often in life on this journey, we're brought to a sudden halt when the wind is taken out of our sails, often not of our own making or desire, and believe you me, I know that. And somehow when we are left adrift, it is then that we begin to realize that those things that we valued so highly when we were sailing comfortably are not so valuable, and those things that we took for granted were too quickly underappreciated. Today I speak to you on the cusp of two significant holidays in our nation's calendar, National Heroes Day and Labor Day. Nowhere have these two holidays borne more significance in my mind than they do this year, where a list of 10 officially recognized heroes had to be updated to collectively include thousands more yesterday. To date, as the lives of each and every one of us have become dependent on the conscientiousness and sense of responsibility of those unsung heroes who continue to work during this trying time, to ensure, I might add, that Barbadians have some measure of comfort and normalcy, we are reminded that heroes are born and idols are made. As we continue to salute our medical professionals who leave their families daily to ensure that the rest of us remain safe, we must not ignore the value of the support services of the cleaner, of the hospital porter and orderly, of the supermarket and gas station worker, of our policemen and our soldiers, our bank tellers and branch managers, our water and electricity and telephone workers, all of whom and many, many, many more continue to perform their duties with dignity and respect. They stand alongside, proudly so, our nurses and our doctors on the front line, necessary, vital, indispensable. And so we are forced to recognize what we already knew. There is no front line without the back line, my friends. This evening, yet again, I salute you. I salute you all, each and every worker who has helped this nation and our people thus far in this still evolving challenge. And when this is over, we will redouble our efforts, trust me, to build that better society when all are valued for nothing less or more than their humanity. That remains our steadfast mission. My brothers and sisters, I know that the questions that many of you would like me to answer right off, straight off, are we lifting the curfew? Are we opening up restaurants? What about the rum? Can we get a sea bath? When can we go back to work? Believe you me, I got you. And I will answer all of these and more before I end this address. But I want you first to walk with me a little as we speak about this journey that we as a people, as Barbadians, are on, where we are going, and the headwinds and the tailwinds. My people, this is one of those occasions when I would have preferred an opportunity to speak with each of you individually, one by one. But even though I cannot do so, rest assured that my team and I have been listening. We've heard your concerns and the realities of all Barbadians and placed them at the center of everything that we are doing. We know you're worried about the safety of your loved ones. You're worried too about your livelihood, and that you need more information about what is going to happen and when it will happen, and generally what you ought to be doing at this point. The truth is, I want to thank you because so many of you have just simply cooperated with us. But sadly, however, certainty is not in the gift of anyone in this new reality, any part of the world. What I can say to you is that your government is ready to do whatever it takes to keep you safe. And you would have seen that in the way that we pitched our tent high, in terms of the facilities that we have gone out and built, in terms of our workforce and making sure that they are at the center, in terms of holding stock levels of essential supplies well above our current needs in spite of our fiscal difficulties. We have a well-considered plan, but any plan we pursue must be done within the context and reality of this pandemic that we are facing. COVID-19, my friends, is not to be taken lightly. As of 6 p.m. this evening, a staggering 3,207,164 persons have tested positive for the coronavirus across the entire world. And regrettably, some 227,368 deaths have been recorded worldwide as of 6 p.m. 1 hour ago. Among these are too many Barbadians from across mainly the diaspora, and yet again we extend our sympathy to them, our hugs, our kisses, our prayers, our love. And today, regrettably, we lost our very latest victim here at home, a 78-year-old woman who had a history of diabetes and hypertension and regrettably was on the ventilator for 33 days. Our prayers remain with her family and all of the other families who have lost loved ones or who have had to pray as their family members have fought valiantly against this virulent virus. The sad occasion and this death today, however, coincides with the news of yet another day of zero positive results. And believe you me, we are testing. Over the last 2 weeks, we have had 7 cases of positive return as compared to 73 in the 5 weeks before that. We have well tested more than 1,200 persons. I don't have the exact number on me, but believe you me, we are testing. Apart from the unfortunate National Assistance Board cluster, it means that in spite of our heightened daily testing, at last the trajectory of cases in Barbados is declining. However, you and I both know that one swallow does not a summer make. The danger lies in those who may not be showing initial symptoms, and we have therefore to remain ever vigilant. Why? Because, my friends, this disease is nobody's friend. It does not discriminate, as we would have seen with Prince Charles and the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and several others contracting it. We've also had celebrities like Ken Corsby and Michael Gilks who not only contracted it, but regrettably have passed. All the experts have pointed out that without the procurement of a vaccine or indeed at least an effective treatment, which could regrettably be as much as 12 to 18 months away, without that to fight this deadly virus, we will have to adjust to a new normal. And it is within this framework that we have now set out a plan for our country. A plan that will simply, my friends, require all hands to be on deck. The plan we will present to you today results from our experts listening to all at home and abroad, without arrogance and without pride getting into the way. When I speak of we, I don't only refer to myself as chairman of the cabinet, but I refer to all who have been acting in my stead, and I thank them yet again, from the acting Prime Minister to those members of cabinet who have been working flat out, particularly those who have been on the front line in government's administration as we manage this crisis. But I also refer to the senior public officers, from those, the Chief Medical Officer and all of the public health doctors and the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Health, and those from the Security and Emergency Planning Systems, those from the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, those from the Ministry of Small Business, those from the Ministry of Agriculture, all across our sector. We have taken a whole of government approach, and with also the social partnership, a whole of society approach. I also speak of our key economic advisors who have navigated us superbly through this first 20 months of tightrope walking. And you know, I feel it because, as I said to you in Parliament on the 20th of March, we've gone straight back to the start line. So I know how Ministers Strawn and Cadell and Dr. Maskell and Dr. Greenidge and Professor Passad and P.S. Headley and Director of Finance Carrington and all of those in the budget analysts and the debt management section, I can see their faces now. I know how all of them feel because they have worked beyond the call of duty to take our country to this part. Similarly, the social partnership with whom we are interacting as a government every few days, the head of the private sector in the Chamber of Commerce, the BHTA, the Bankers Association, representatives of all of the unions, both Senators Moore and Caswell Franklin, Edwin O'Neill and Akani McDowell and Delcia Burke, BAMP and the other representative agencies in Setu Sab. We have been working. We've now been privileged to be joined for this national rebirth by our Jobs and Investment Advisory Council, comprising experienced persons and those with creativity, entrepreneurs and CEOs, principal of UWI Cave Hill, and persons in the cloth, former ministers of finance. We have a full team, local and Barbadians internationally, who have come together and already have had an initial meeting with myself as chair of the council, and we expect to receive reports from the various subcommittees to our 5 questions as to how we can justly rebuild and transform our nation. I wish also to thank the scores of Barbadians who also have been reaching out to the government and to myself, selflessly, tirelessly. They've stepped forward to serve and to share. They're not in it for the recognition. There are too many, but we know who they are, and we are immensely grateful because this is our nation. So as you can see, my friends, this is one of the most experienced and accomplished national advisory bodies, as well as a government that is committed to work as we move forward in this country. The social partnership is part of our model. I remind you that we have come together to tackle the greatest threat to our social and economic stability and well-being, certainly for the past 70 to 80 years since World War II. As daunting as the task might appear, this team, empaneled to take on the assignment, will do its duty by the people of this nation. And what is that assignment? We have embarked upon a plan to wrestle the impact and effects of COVID-19 to the ground. We want to contain it. Over the past few weeks, we've thought of, analyzed, and carefully planned for many scenarios. And we've done our modeling. Trust me when I tell you, we have approached this matter from many perspectives, risks, and threats. Firstly, it must be generally understood that exiting lockdown before a vaccine or herd immunity, as I said earlier, is problematic, mainly because it appears that a large percentage of persons, maybe as high as 50%, with COVID-19 could be without symptoms, as they say, asymptomatic. They could have and carry the disease, and we wouldn't know. Contact tracing can help, but the only real way of identifying the asymptomatic carriers is through mass testing, and those tests are still not as accurate as we would like. Simply exiting lockdown in the presence of asymptomatic people and before a vaccine or herd immunity could send us back into lockdown again and again, and we've already heard them speak about different waves. Similarly, not exiting lockdown is also a problem, and you know it and I know it. No amount of drama in the economic statistics, no amount of even citing a doubling of unemployment in the last 8 weeks, or 20% contraction of our economy and counting, none of that describes the stark reality that a vast majority of our population now do not have the savings to manage comfortably without income for even a short period of time. We're not Norway. We don't have a sovereign wealth fund built up that can help us get through this period. It would be hard to conjure up circumstances more likely to tear apart our social fabric, the social fabric of this society that has been worked upon so hard by generations of people. It is hard. And my friends, when you think of those who may be unemployed or short of food and whose everyday freedoms are now constrained, we really have to pause. There's an essential psychological and time dimension too. The spirit of Dunkirk, for those of you who remember that famous moment in World War II, or the spirit equally of those in Golden Square before the start of World War II, right here in our own Bridgetown, on the night of July 26, 1937. These spirits could be evoked at the beginning of the first lockdown, but not after repeated prolonged lockdowns and depressing uncertainties as to when or if this will change. Dunkirk occurred right at the beginning of the war, not in the middle of destruction and despair. And indeed, Golden Square heralded the beginning of our political movements and our labor movements as we know them. There is also, my friends, a troubling contrast. Many of those vulnerable people who are most vulnerable to falling off the social, economic, and psychological edge because they're now incapable of providing for themselves and their loved ones are often those least likely to have complications from catching COVID-19. The young and the healthy. That's a fact. They're the least vulnerable. On the other hand, many of those that we need to protect, the elderly and the sick, the ones who are most vulnerable to COVID-19, are often those least affected financially by a lockdown because they were not working full-time, or they may already be receiving their pension checks, and therefore a cessation of work does not affect them. Further, forcing our people to remain in small places and spaces near their grandparents or those who psychologically need outlets may create new risk. What is it I'm saying? Lockdown, regrettably, is a blunt instrument. To lock down or to open up is a false distinction. More useful divisions are between people who are predominantly safe and those who are largely vulnerable, and the activities that are mainly safe and those activities that may be too risky to undertake. We need to exit lockdown after a period long enough to see those with symptoms, treat and isolate them, and carry out contact tracing. But we can only exit lockdown successfully by ensuring that safe people are going to go back to work, but doing only safe things in new and safe ways, and vulnerable people isolated from them in safe places, only doing very safe things. I've told you before that we may well come to a condition where 60% of our workers are working for the rest of the workforce because we want to keep safe people doing safe things and those who are most vulnerable to COVID separated from those who may have to work and to carry it. Within these two guardrails, a significant amount of economic activity can return, my friends, saving some of the jobs, saving livelihoods, and the revenues necessary to provide the essential services that our society needs. This exit plan requires three things. First, we need to identify those safe people and those who are vulnerable. And we can do so by identifying the safest population segments. I mentioned earlier the young and healthy population segment above, but I emphasize healthy given that some of our young people have hypertension and diabetes, regrettably, two critical comorbidities of COVID-19. Second, we need to lay down the criteria of safe activity. And let me just say on the first one that I just left, that as we identify them, we want to work with you in communities to identify where these people who are most vulnerable live. And if we have to separate through living arrangements, families need to come together and talk to each other to see how those who are least vulnerable to COVID can live separately from those who are most vulnerable. And if that can't happen within a family, then we need to look at the communities. And if it doesn't happen within the family or the community, then the government will work with you to start to identify options for living so that those people can work again. As I said, in respect of the other criteria for safe activity, in particular physical distancing, personal protective equipment protocols, good hygiene practices, and managing or eliminating all points of human contact. It may be possible to make much of what we do safe using these protocols that we have been looking at and the technology, but we need to monitor and enforce it too. And by that I mean not only management, but every person, worker or client, customer or onlooker has a role in helping to reinforce the safe measures that we must continue to take. And I say so knowing that every so often sometimes I may try to touch my face, and I've been trying to break myself of that habit. Once only thus far this evening. Third, we need to ensure that safe people are doing safe things in a safe way beyond work, including when they are returning home or how they get to work, the way we manage our travel and transport on buses and returning home is absolutely critical. There will be many homes where such segmentation is not easily possible. As I said earlier, displacing those most vulnerable from their home or the elderly or sick is much more complicated. And that's why I want families to start to have the conversations and communities. And if that can't be resolved, we will have to pull in others to help us through this period of emergency. Private accommodation and transport services currently lying idle in the tourism sector or elsewhere may have to be pressed into action. But we are small enough to go into every community and every workplace and have the conversations, because this is unlikely to leave us in a hurry. So my friends, this plan is about three main things. First and foremost, it's about public health and keeping people safe post-lockdown. Secondly, it is about exiting full lockdown and starting to bring back activities so that we can go onwards and upwards and stopping the spread of severe risk to society and security from not doing so. Finally, it is about breathing hope and killing despair. I want to repeat it. It is about breathing hope and killing despair in our land. It is a plan that engages all of society and makes a subtle shift from command and control to a sense that we are doing something positive about our lives, our communities, and the circumstances in which we find ourselves. Permit me now to share with you some of the new protocols that we will require for all activities outside of your home. Protocols for safe people doing safe things and for vulnerable people at home who need to be protected. 1, vulnerable people have first to be determined. Anyone who has a high temperature or a new persistent cough, anyone who has lost the sense of smell and taste, we've learned. Anyone who is a vulnerable person by your age, we've already asked persons over 70 to remain at home. I know it's difficult. I know I'm in touch with my parents all the time. I know it is hard. But whether it is your age or your underlying health condition or the clinical condition, or if you're pregnant, we're asking you not to take chances. We will get through this and we will be here to see you when we get through it, my friends. Similarly, are you living with someone in self-isolation or as a vulnerable person? If so, you shouldn't come to work for now. Secondly, we're asking persons all in the public who are going into the public and moving around to start to use masks, whether disposable or cloth. And I know that many of you have started. We have not yet made it mandatory, but we are considering doing so. And at this point in time, until such time, we're asking all of you to wear the mask. Our concern about making it mandatory is that we have adequate supply on islands so that we do not make criminals out of people who are not wearing it. And I'm waiting on that information. I know that some of you already have the disposable mask, surgical, and in particular the N95 mask. But let us agree as we go forward that as far as possible, these should be left for our healthcare workers and our frontline workers. Indeed, Barbadians I know will buy and will make masks, just as I'm so proud at what was done at the Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute with the project with the face shields from the 3D printers that the government invested in some time back. It shows what we can do. 3, travel to the workplace has to be something now that we consider. Wherever possible, workers should travel to their workplace alone using their transport or getting transport from others. Employers need to consider 1, parking arrangements for additional cars and bicycles, providing hand cleaning facilities at entrances and exits. Many who will travel on public transport will now know that buses will be limited to 60% capacity now to provide sufficient space, and only one person at a time can sit in a row on a row of chairs. 3, workplace access points. No non-essential visitors should be allowed. All persons entering the work site are, with their consent, to have their temperature taken, before proceeding onto the site. Temperatures on sites should be tested twice daily by a dedicated nurse assigned to carry out this duty for large workplaces like construction sites, supermarkets, and manufacturing plants or call centers. Employers should introduce staggered start and finish times where possible to reduce congestion and contact as far as possible. All workers, we know this already, must wash or clean their hands before entering or leaving the workplace, and I'd like to believe even during the time that they're at work. Employers must also allow plenty of space, preferably 6 feet, although the WHO's regulations say 3 feet, but 6 feet preferably, between people waiting to enter the site. Employers must regularly clean common contact surfaces, and we know what they are in a supermarket, their trolleys, in other places, their counters, we know what they are. 4, hand washing. I almost feel as though someone is speaking to us as if we were back in primary school, but forgive me. It is so powerful because if you understand how the virus looks, you then begin to understand how soap and water kills the outside lining of the virus and protects us in that way. And that is why we say wash your hands or use hand sanitizer with at least 70% alcohol. Employers must provide additional hand washing facilities, therefore, to what they normally have. And on the larger sites, this is in particular something that we will insist on because of the significant numbers of personnel on site. They must ensure that the soap and fresh water is readily available and kept topped up at all times, a simple task. 5, with respect to canteen and eating arrangements, the workforce for now should be required to stay on site once they have entered it and not seek to use a lot of local shops. Break times should be staggered or reduce congestion and contact at all times. The workforce should be asked as far as possible to bring their meals and refillable drinking bottles from home. Now remember, this is not going to be forever. So when we ask you to do these things, especially as we open back, I beg you, please do them. Workers should sit, as I said, 6 feet apart from each other while eating and avoid all contact. And payments should be taken as far as possible by contactless methods wherever possible. In other words, put the money in a container and pass the container forward to the person who's working. 6, avoid close working wherever possible. Non-essential physical work that requires close contact between workers should not be carried out. Work requiring human contact should not be carried out at this stage. All workers, except obviously in the healthcare sector, all workers should wear the disposable face mask issued once made available. The close contact will also come with respect to those in law enforcement or others who are simply carrying out their duty to be able to ensure that people are safe in this country. Employers should also seek, where possible, to increase ventilation in enclosed spaces. And they should regularly clean the inside of work vehicles and between use by different operators who may be using the vehicles. Only necessary meeting participants should attend indoor meetings once again. Rubbish collection and storage points should be increased and emptied regularly throughout and at the end of each day. Beyond these protocols, my friends, we must phase our approach to limit bunching and congestion and potential sources at risk. I now refer below to a list of activities that obviously will be distributed electronically and in the media, but I'm going to go through them for the avoidance of doubt, and that we believe that it is now safe for us to start in phase 1 to manage congestion and density. This list will be posted, and as I said, we will review it every 2 weeks. But if necessary, we will take action in between in the event of a public emergency or the public interest. The sectors in which we can deal with this, therefore, are threefold. First, those activities that can be carried out without public gathering. Second, those activities that are not carried out in close proximity to others in enclosed spaces. And 3, those activities that are an integral part of the supply chain for any essential services or products or of any sector that is already open. If we are in phase 1 today, and we are following, and the following sectors therefore will now be open for phase 2 on Monday, May 4th. I want to repeat myself for the avoidance of doubt. We will be moving to phase 2 on Monday, May the 4th. And everything that was allowed to function in phase 1, and you know what they are, from the limited operations of banks and supermarkets and hardware stores, etc., they will continue to function. For the absence of doubt, therefore, please remember and look at the documents that are already out there that would have guided you over the course of the last few weeks. Similarly now, we want to add these sectors that can be carried out. Anything that can be carried out fully at your house, fine. Online, fine. But we want to add now construction and mining, landscaping, gardening and pool services, food and beverages, manufacturing and retailing. So it's not the actual restaurant, it's the manufacturing and reselling of food and beverages. Supermarkets, as I said, finance and insurance companies, legal, accounting and other professional services to support businesses, particularly those businesses that I said just now are already open, tradesmen like joiners and upholsterers and welding workshops, automotive stores and workshops that are necessary to support the maintenance of a safe public transport and private transport system, electronic stores other than for mobile ICT matters, retailers of baby products because mothers are still having babies, building supplies, beauty supply stores. I know that a lot of people are getting very fretful and they may have to do some stuff on their own before we reach to the next level where those people we are accustomed going to, we can go back to in a safe way. And we're working hard on that. Health and medical services have already always remained open. Office equipment and supplies, pet services and supplies, because equally pets are living animals and therefore they need to be able to have access to medicine or to whatever else they may need for us to keep them safe. Safety equipment, security products and services, marine products distributors, educational suppliers, dry cleaning and laundry services, distribution and printing supplies, delivery companies. As to what many of you have been asking for, we will allow the sale of alcohol from Monday, May the 4th, but no consumption in public. And believe you me, my friends, we will monitor this closely. I am not by any means approved, but we have to look out at this stage for the wider public interest. We would also like, in a very limited way, to reopen our beaches from May 4th. And therefore we will start only between 6 in the morning and 9 in the morning every morning, and particularly for those elderly people who may have joint problems and who cannot therefore exercise on the road or run or walk, but who need the sea in order to be able to allow their bodies to be able to get that kind of movement that is necessary to avoid the pain. May I say that we will be monitoring closely to see whether we can safely widen this window, but at this stage it is only 6 in the morning to 9 in the morning, and we are encouraging persons to go to the sea, exercise on the beach, go in the water, come back out, exercise if you may, but do not congregate on the beaches. If not, we will have to take additional action. To help, I will also now share with you a list of what we do not now yet consider safe or essential activity, but we will work with you in those businesses to settle clear protocols so that we can have safe work for you and your customers. What am I referring to in phase 3 potentially? These are the ones that we will review generally in 2-week modules, as I said, but we reserve the right to bring forward any if necessary in the public interest. I refer now specifically, therefore, to those that we will look at in phase 3, potentially after May 18th. Bookstores, home furnishing, houseware stores, clothing stores, flower shops, restaurant equipment and wholesale equipment, schools generally, sports equipment, souvenirs and gift shops, arcades and betting shops, barber and beauty stores, personal care and wellness suppliers, sports suppliers, and of course entertainment and restaurants. And with those, we will look forward to see how best we can deal with them, particularly with whether we can bring forward elements of drive-through and also delivery for restaurants. We will address that separately when I'm satisfied that we have the appropriate protocols to be able to reopen. And it may well be in that last category that we may get there before May 18th, but we must have the requisite protocols to protect our people. Let me now address the public service. Earlier today, my Minister of Education, Santia, spoke to the country and indicated that classes in the third term for all public schools will officially start electronically next Monday, 4th of May. For the avoidance of doubt, please, no child is to go physically to school at the school plant for classes. Why? Because she announced that it will be electronic, that they will use the G Suite Tech Drive project, which will provide much needed assistance to several students who require devices in order to participate in the remote learning platform G Suite for Education, which the ministry will be using. My friends, this is not a perfect situation, and we did not plan for this at this point. But I am extremely pleased that this initiative has garnered significant support from the private sector as well as individuals across our nation who have come forward to help us in the effort of ensuring that more of our students receive the platform, the tablets, or the various instruments in order to be able to participate in the electronic learning. With the best will in the world and even with the money available, there will also be a supply and logistics issue with most borders having been closed across the world. And we will therefore have to see that we give first and foremost those students in greatest need across the educational system to these tablets. With respect to the rest of the functioning of the public service, we can very cautiously reopen many areas of the public service on a phased basis, both to provide additional services to the public and to support the private sector effort. I wish to stress that this initiative to ease restrictions is being guided by the best advice from our health professionals regarding infections on the island and other relevant data. Against this background, effective Monday, May the 4th, next Monday, the following will pertain. 1. Those government offices which have been functioning over the curfew period will continue to do so with their regular staff numbers. These include the General Post Office, the National Insurance Department, and the Customs and Excise Department and Immigration Departments. Other government entities which provide functions deemed critical at this time will recommence operations with regular staffing complements to provide full services. Some staff will continue to work from home, and some will come to the office in a flexible arrangement. I consider it important to get the seeds of economic activity growing again, as I indicated, and therefore departments such as those responsible for projects in the Ministry of Transport, Works and Maintenance, in the Lands and Surveys Department, in the Ministry of Housing and the Land Registry, and in the Rural Development Commission are supportive of the kinds of targeted construction activities that we need at this time. Similarly, there will be other entities like the Urban Development Commission that is involved in the completion of the construction of the Cheapside Market, as well as the new facilities for the bargain vendors on the Spring Garden Highway that will have to work. The wider public service, I should say to you, sorry, before going on, that the Bridgetown Port will be operating, I'm informed, from tomorrow in order to be able to facilitate the opening of those stores on Monday that we spoke about. And for that to happen, we need to make sure that the backlog in containers in the port starts to be cleared. And similarly, the Attorney General has already recognized that a number of persons involved in those businesses that will open Monday will need to be able to move in order to be able to get their offices ready to engage the public at that point. The wider public service generally will open with minimal staff on Monday, May the 4th, and will provide only basic services initially. These entities will increase their staffing complements and services provided in the coming weeks as the situation allows. And that is because we don't want to have too many people moving back into work and on the roads at the same time. So we're taking a phased approach. Those offices which nevertheless will have partial staffing initially to facilitate the public will be entities like the Town and Country Planning Department and the Urban Development Commission, as I mentioned just now, units in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs and Investment, including the Public Investment Unit that is helping us deal with a lot of matters now, and as I indicated earlier, the RDC, Rural Development Commission, and the Ministry of Housing, Lands and Rural Development. I want to stress, my friends, that when these new measures come on stream, in all instances across all arms of government, the requirement of physical distancing must be observed. Only those engagements which do not put the public nor the officers in danger should be allowed. As we go forward, there will necessarily be a need to work through issues in this new environment, such as the provision of personal protective equipment for staff and adjustments to some physical spaces. It will be important for persons to follow the guidelines, observe the physical distancing, and wear masks as advised, as we indicated earlier. Members of the public should also expect that the speed of service delivery in some partially staffed offices will not be the same as obtained when those offices were operating with full staff and complements. And I ask you to remember this and to be patient as we try to meet the needs of the country's public health while still ramping back up some level of services for the benefit of you, the public. I also encourage, wherever possible, those of you who may communicate with government offices by telephone or electronically, do it wherever possible. Where it is necessary to physically interact with the government agencies, then clearly I'm asking you in these first few weeks to try as far as possible to follow the lettering system that is now in place for your shopping and for the conduct of your bank transactions. Note I said as far as possible. We are adults and we need to trust each other. But remember always, if it gets out of hand, the government will take whatever action is needed to protect the health of the people of this country. From all reports, the system has been working reasonably well. The first few days, I know people were nervous, but over the last 2 weeks, 10 days, whatever it was, we have seen generally that people have found their feet. And we expect similarly with government agencies that you will find your feet as we deal with this phased reopening. There are a number of approaches which will be used to ensure best working practice in this new environment is achieved. First, as I said, those officers who can work from home will have the opportunity to do so. Over the past 5 weeks or so, many officers have been working remotely already, and in the coming weeks, we will be seeking to acquire the technology for more of you to provide that option as far as possible. Secondly, a system of staff rotation and flexi time will be implemented across the public sector, and the Ministry of Public Service has already been discussing this with its union partners. Permanent secretaries have already been requested to provide operational plans to give effect to these approaches, and this process will therefore be managed by them in consultation with the head of the public service, and officers will be informed by the permanent secretaries and their heads of department. So if you are in doubt over the next few days how you will work within your ministry, then you need to report to your superior, head of department, or permanent secretary for them to advise you how it will be done. And my friends, we've been doing it in a number of ministries the last 5 weeks. I keep telling you that the doctors told me I'm supposed to be on sick leave, but I know the efficiency of the environment within which the government has been operating, because very often, almost daily, they have reached out to me electronically, and officers have done so from their homes safely, but we've gotten on with the business of the country. There will be adjustments and refinements. Let me tell you that up front. There will be adjustments and refinements as we go forward. I've told you over and over, we are not omniscient, and therefore we will listen and we will respond. We will continue to discuss with this public sector and any other sectors the protocols that would allow us to be able to open you at a sooner date than what we are planning to, if possible, but if not, in a phased manner as we go forward. So my friends, every 2 weeks on average, we will look and see, but as I said, if necessary, we'll move forward. In front of phase 2 comes phase 3 and phase 4. And many of you may ask, what is phase 4? Well, phase 4 will be when we can return to as close to normal after an effective treatment or vaccine has been procured, and we can get back to the kind of life that we were accustomed to. But we are not yet there. I'm also in conversation with members of the private sector to establish a hotline for some of you working within the private sector as tradesmen, as small businesses, as larger entities, but who may be unsure if you are allowed or when you will be allowed to work and under what conditions. This hotline will hopefully liaise with the relevant health and government officials to provide the answers and approvals to you and to your companies and other individuals in a seamless way. And I look forward to that information being distributed to you over the course of the next few days. We will keep you informed in a frank, honest, and continued way, regular conversations, and give you notice wherever possible. What people, however, must now focus on is how do we create these livelihoods again that will allow people to live and live with dignity. If we move to phases where people are doing safe things in safe ways, there will be a return of a degree of economic activity, employment, jobs, and income. Note I said a degree, but it will take a while before all activity returns. Tourism will not be as quick to return, although at the CARICOM level we are speaking to see what will be the kinds of protocols that will have to inform us, because we are not going to take foolish chances with our people. Financial institutions will also be cautious. The economic consequences, my friends, as you are seeing every day, not just Barbados, not just the Caribbean, are severe. We estimate that over the next 12 months, and we've had to revise upwards the numbers that we spoke about 3-4 weeks ago in Parliament, that we will lose now in the vicinity of $450 million in government's tax revenues as a result of the economy being fully, partially shut, or only slowly opening. There will be less income tax collected, less corporation tax, less value-added tax, less excise tax, less duties, less fuel at airport, and the air transport levies, well, that's shut down for now. We have spent or committed over $75 million in health-related expenditures over the course of the last few weeks on different items. Whether it is isolation, quarantine, treatment centers, new planned equipment. Some of it was, fair enough, equipment needed by the QEH for many years. And that, along with that for the polyclinics, constitutes a good $40 million outside of the sum of money that we have tested, with the remaining going towards the COVID-19 epidemic. So my friends, this is a time when we need to press forward. The government has recognized that we will also have to spend significant sums of money, and I'll share that with you shortly, on the National Insurance Scheme, which is being overwhelmed by the number of unemployment and severance applications. Without doing anything, the difference in public revenues and expenditures in this country could worsen by a cumulative $700 million. While this is challenging enough to deal with, what has kept us on course has been the certain knowledge that if COVID were to have struck us in May 2018, when the country's reserves were barely above $400 million, the country was running then a massive deficit after a decade of even longer deficits, we would be in a very different position than we are today to meet the crisis. It wouldn't just be the hotels that would be shutting, but indeed probably most of government. There would have been no money and no credit to buy ventilators, to buy the tests, to buy the personal protective equipment, to fix a Harrison's point, to do a number of the things that we've been doing. It is the hard work done over the course of the last just under 2 years, from our debt restructuring to, regrettably, yes, the higher land taxes for some, and yes, the bus fares for all, that has enabled us to focus firmly on our public health first. Just before COVID-19 struck, our reserves had reached $1.55 billion, the highest level at that time recorded on a like-for-like basis for a while. Today, as a result of the low-interest borrowing from our partners, the Inter-American Development Bank being the most recent one, our reserves today, as I speak to you, are just over $1.7 billion. It is more than enough reserve cover. And the governor of the central bank will speak to you tomorrow, and he will carry you through where we are with respect to the condition of our economy and how we can endure what we are going. Ironically, we are also in the middle of an IMF mission this week as I speak to you, and we are moving along in a manner that is satisfactory and to us as to them. Our economy was sticking to the course, provided us with the reserves, provided us with the room, provided us with the credit, and enough standing now, regionally and internationally, for us to launch this most comprehensive integrated program that the country has had ever seen, largely because we've never had this kind of crisis facing us. We focus the program on supporting those who have lost their jobs in this shutdown, and to keep those as far as possible who have jobs into the jobs. The economic plan, as I said earlier, has 5 parts. The parts are different, and so it is not straightforward to add them up into one number. But the effect of them is to fill the hole in spending in this economy to the tune of near $2 billion over 2 years. This is the biggest package of spending initiatives ever rolled out over a 2-year period on a supplemental basis from what we would otherwise have as our core activities. Some of these measures were announced, as I said, on the 20th of March, just over a month ago, and I only repeat some of them in summary here for you to see how the entire package of actions fits together and relates to each other. The first part, as you might well recall, was the acceleration of $1.7 billion of public or public-private or private capital works program across infrastructure, renewable energy, digitization, affordable housing, refurbishment of buildings, fixing of roads in this country. Many will focus on what they're familiar with, the construction of hotels, but there is much emphasis here on the new sectors of renewable energy, improving the environment, health and educational services, digitalization of products, particularly government's records and allowing us to move to an e-government platform as far as possible, support to entrepreneurs, and the provision of houses, particularly for low-income and lower-middle-income Barbadians. Second part is a massive drive towards greater food self-sufficiency, and you all know that the feed program is seeking to add 750 additional acres, and they've started already in that program alongside with the traditional larger farmers in the island who are being encouraged to expand production as well. The third part is a series of new measures amounting to $210 million to support households affected by the shutdown. Part of this you know already, and I'll come to it, and part is new. And the fourth part, which is largely new, which I'll announce tonight, is a series of measures that inject $215 million one way and a $200 million fund being mobilized on condition that we hold on to as much staff and jobs as possible. And indeed, the fund to which I've referred, you will hear me refer, would be the establishment of a Barbados Tourism Fund for assisting in working capital and, where possible, blended finance towards the modernizing and upgrading of our tourism product. Part 1, my friends, the public and private sector program, I shall not spend much time on, as I said, because I've already spoken to you about it, and that is the public and private capital works program of $1.7 billion over the course of the next 2 years. This sum, also this year, includes an additional $90 million in central government's capital expenditure program over what we spent last year. To put it simply, we will now be spending at least $274 million in our capital government's capital budget on the refurbishment of buildings, on road construction, market refurbishment, a massive environmental cleanup and sanitization program, digitization, and the other projects that I've spoken to you generally about when I spoke on March 20th. This does not include an expanded capital works program to be undertaken by the Barbados Water Authority, which we are now working with them to raise $50 million to start that process that will see a number of critical water projects undertaken and completed in order to improve the very unfortunate position where some Barbadians in parishes are still not receiving the flow of water. I should remind us all that we have already spent in COVID expenditure, specifically over the course of the last few months, and that would have been brought to book in the last financial year, a sum of $44.4 million, which includes from the refurbishment of Harrison's Point that I spoke about to the purchase of critical medical equipment and supplies and other supplementary goods needed to manage and contain the spread of the virus. And indeed, we would also have included the restocking of medication on an early basis given the disruption of the supply chain that we saw globally. And we felt that we wanted to protect our access to critical medication, not just for COVID, but across the board. The government is also working with financial institutions on a massive public-private home building program called Homes for All, and I explained that to you on the last occasion. We're also working with private investors on a range of renewable energy investments, including the 360 million green energy park supplying 30 megawatts of renewable power that we hope will be launched and will be the subject of discussions and negotiations with the Ministry and the Barbados Light and Power and the Sanitation Services Authority. We are aligning our regulations generally to ensure that our 2030 target for being fossil fuel free will spur an investment boom in renewables from as early as the next 9 months. And finally, we anticipate, as I've indicated, about $800 million still in investment from the private sector, and hoping that that number will even increase. Even though the average construction period is likely to last longer, we hope, than the pandemic, bankers in some instances are getting a little anxious on summer projects, and therefore I'm only speaking to the ones that we are certain about. In recent weeks, where that anxiety has cropped up, my team has been working hard with other financial institutions regionally and internationally, and with private investors to support at least the early resumption or to start back up those projects that may have difficulties. The ones to which I speak that constitute just over the $800 million over the next 24 months are as follows. Sam Lord's, and some will resume as early as the next week or two. Sam Lord's Castle, as I told you before, has resumed, and that, as you know, is a $400 million project. 75 apartments at the Crane, which were being built and should be completed by the end of this year. $25 million in improvements to the Apes Hill Golf Course that had also started before the shutdown. The projects that we are working on to start, we hope by the end of June this year, include the $60 million expansion of Sandals at Dover that they'd like to see finished by the end of the year in time for the next winter season, hopefully if we are in a position to reopen. The $200 million Sagicor Retirement Villages project, which has already garnered a number of purchases and commitments and therefore can proceed going forward. The Hyatt Ziva project of $400 million. And may I say at this stage that we need to start the demolition of the two remaining buildings, the MG Tucker site and the other site of liquidation center, as soon as possible, and preferably before we are fully operational. I am being advised that that may be as early as this weekend or next week. This is by no means an exhaustive list, my friends, but only the very immediate ones. I use this opportunity to remind us of the establishment of the Jobs and the Investment Advisory Council again, and I've asked the GIS Government Information Service to issue a press release tomorrow so you'll see all of the members and the various subcommittees that we have established in order to be able to report back to government within the next 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the area of concentration. We know we have to build back, and we know we have to build back better. And I look forward, therefore, to their responses, particularly to the 5 questions that we have given them that we will use to enhance government's development program as we go forward. Believe you me, my friends, Barbados needs to be able to diversify our economy as far as possible. Against that background, food security. We've talked about it too long. We've started to bring into cultivation 750 acres of land for short crop cultivation under government's feed program. This will not only boost employment, provide jobs, but it will also support our longer-term goals to enhance our country's food security and to improve linkages between the tourism and agricultural sectors. But it will also, importantly, increase our reserves at a critical time if we can reduce our food imports. Interestingly enough, the discussions are taking place in the US now as to what may happen to their food chain, and hence the President's determination to give the executive order with respect to the supply, production and supply of meat. We recognize that one of the biggest threats to agricultural livelihoods in our country has been and continues to be predial larceny. And it is particularly criminal at this time when we know that food is so valuable to so many households. My government is committed to putting an end to it as far as possible. But we need to work with you and the communities to make sure that people's hard work does not come to naught because of people stealing. I spoke to the Attorney General, and he has agreed to issue instructions to the Royal Barbados Police Force to establish a dedicated predial larceny unit for enforcement, strict enforcement. But we will also let technology work for us by allowing farmers to use drones so that they may use geofencing to protect crops and livestock. Part 3 of our economic program is a $210 million flow of funds to support vulnerable households. The first one, I remind you, the national insurance system, as we've said before, is the first line of defense for most of our households. Those who were laid off by their employer get unemployment benefits for 6 months. Those on short week will get 60% for the days that they're not working. So if you work 3 days, you'll get 60% of the other 2 days being paid to you. I announced these measures, as I said, on the 20th of March earlier in Parliament. In the last 5 weeks, however, our national insurance scheme has received, as of Monday this week, 29,076 new claims for unemployment benefits. It is a staggering number. More are still likely to come. My team has worked hard to remove the red tape that would otherwise have delayed payment to this group of Barbadians, and many have already received their first check last week, and others are continuing to do so this week. Indeed, as of Monday, the NIS has paid 10,989 persons the large sum of $11.19 million for unemployment benefits, and that would carry them for the first 4-week period. The NIS will continue to dispatch all of the benefit claims as far as possible, as quickly as possible. You will ask yourself, does the NIS have more than sufficient assets to cover this? Yes, we do. We have the sufficient assets to meet these demands. But many of these assets are not liquid, or it's not in the right divisions. For example, our severance payments fund is a healthy $140 million, while our unemployment benefit was down to $19 million, which, as you can see from the first few payments, will cause it to be exhausted any minute now. The government, therefore, will support the national insurance scheme, whether through existing funds being held at the central bank from loans that we've already received under policy-based lending, or by purchasing bonds that the NIS holds to the tune of $250 million. The economic team will settle which method it prefers in the next few days. But in essence, if we go that way, we will prepay the NIS early bonds that it holds and finance potentially the issuance of a pandemic solidarity bond to allow the NIS to move forward without in any way affecting the deficit, but at the same time meeting the needs of those almost 30,000 Barbadians that are claiming unemployment benefit. We are satisfied that some of them will go back out to work in the next few weeks as we reopen Barbados, while some of them are likely to be there for the long haul. The second point that I'd like to make is that self-employed people who make contributions to the National Insurance Scheme are not entitled to unemployment benefits under the law as it stands now. And while there are genuine practical challenges to providing unemployment benefits to a self-employed person, there is also a real need. There are too many who are now suffering, and we care for all. We will now launch, therefore, a new one-time business cessation benefit for the self-employed of $1,500 per month for each of April and May only, so that those persons who have paid NIS as self-employed persons, and there are roughly just under 2,800 persons who have, will now be entitled to draw $1,500 for April and $1,500 at the end of the month of May. This will cost the National Insurance Scheme the sum of $8.5 million and will be paid out of the monies that we will be providing to enhance the National Insurance Scheme's liquidity over the course of the next few weeks. Let me also remind you, my friends, that I had already announced a household survival program of $20 million to be split between $10 million for welfare to accommodate increased rates of benefits. We increased the benefits, as you know, by 40% as of April 1st. And then another $10 million that I announced, which is to be managed by those households, for those households who do not now receive NIS benefits, but who are in bad need of support. This, we announced, would also be supplemented by the Adopt Our Families program that, my friends, I want to thank you, has already received just under $900,000. And may I continue to ask those who can afford to reach out and to support this fund. If, as a result of COVID-19, a household is left with no one employed, we are using this mechanism to provide a minimum income. It's not as much as we would like, but we do believe that that $600 that is being paid will go a long way to being able to ensure that food can be bought and put on people's table and basic utilities paid. So, as we go forward, this hardship cannot continue, and we can only do our best to be able to fight it, and that is why the Household Mitigation Unit will continue to provide the effective implementation of these sums. The persons that they were looking at last week were just over 3,868 persons, some of whom came off the list because they too would be receiving unemployment benefit. The fourth part of the economic program, my friends, is a $215 million jobs, investment, and business survival program, plus the establishment of a $200 million Barbados Tourism Fund facility, which is a loan facility, and which we are now designing and executing. Let me therefore now come specifically to those measures. The private sector in Barbados is the largest investor and employer in the country by a multiple of 6. In the same way that we needed to take preemptive measures to make sure that the national health system was not overwhelmed by COVID-19 cases, we have to take preemptive measures to make sure our national social security system is not overwhelmed. We achieved this through several steps to support cash flows on condition that firms, as I said, hold on to as much staff as possible. Against that background, I've given instructions, one, for $131 million, which remains to be paid to Barbadians for personal income tax refunds and value-added tax refunds to be paid. $50 million is owed to Bajans and those working here in personal income tax refunds, and $80 million is owed in VAT refunds. In this environment, cash is king. Cash is king for government, for businesses, and indeed for households. This liquidity will be sorely needed today, and therefore will help firms meet their payroll and pay critical suppliers where possible. I will tell you that we also have another $89 million in corporation tax refunds to make, and we shall make those payments later in the year as our cash flow allows. May I remind us as well, however, that this injection of $131 million comes on the heels, my friends, of $205 million in cash payments made for tax arrears already last year, and $301 million issued in bonds to Barbadians and others for Res Life customers for commitments that they had under CLICO, that CLICO had to them, and we settled that $300 million in bonds. And those were just the CLICO commitments, not even the British American ones. These cash flows, I have no doubt, have been instrumental in helping to keep this economy supported up to now. I had already previously announced in Parliament that those employers who retain at least 3/4 of their staff complement will be able to defer the employer's contribution for National Insurance Scheme for the next 3 months in the first instance, with another 3 months if necessary. Understand the impact of that, because it means that NIS's income is being thwarted at the same time that it is being required to pay out large sums of money. In addition to those two, however, I now want to announce that we will establish a new $40 million VAT loan fund for those companies who are registered with and pay value-added tax and who can show that their cash flow has been severely disrupted by the pandemic and the measures taken to contain the outbreak. That's most of you who are registered and pay VAT in this country. This fund, this loan fund, will offer you a 12-month interest-free loan to help buttress your cash flow such that you can get through this difficulty. Who is entitled? Persons who are generally registered with VAT are companies or individuals whose turnover exceeds $200,000 per year. The amount that you may borrow at any time from this fund is limited to 50%, or should I say half, of the amount that you may have paid in your last VAT filing before the onset of the pandemic. This fund will be capitalized by taking the money out of the catastrophe fund that has accumulated over the last 15 years, and this will require legislative amendments which we will undertake urgently. We will seek to repurpose it to avoid insolvency and bankruptcy in too many of our local companies, and indeed, as a result, further unemployment. I want to reassure the people of Barbados about this, that these funds are most needed now. And while the original intention for the catastrophe fund was for this money to be used to assist us in a natural disaster catastrophe, we believe that we are now facing our greatest catastrophe in modern history, in our region, in the world for that matter, since World War II. In 2018 and 2019, when we were restructuring both our domestic and our external debt, and listen to me carefully please, we took the opportunity to include natural disaster clauses that allowed us to have a provision that should we be hit by a tropical storm or a hurricane of a certain parametric trigger, like Tropical Storm Kirk, we would be able to suspend going forward now both the principal and interest of our government debt for 2 years, such that we can meet the immediate needs of the cost of managing a natural disaster. In simple terms, should a tropical storm or a hurricane greater than the strength of Tropical Storm Kirk from 2018 hit us, we will be able to draw down about 1.7, or we will be able to get, I should say, $1.7 billion in fiscal space given the deferral of our debt payments that are provided for in this in this natural disaster clause. Against that background, my friends, what more would 50 million do for us when we will access and unlock literally $1.7 billion in our fiscal space? As a result, our government believes that the greatest use of those funds in the catastrophe fund now is to support Barbadian businesses and Barbadian jobs, and therefore it makes no sense to retain that $50 million in the catastrophe fund when it is needed to keep the heads of people and businesses above water. Eligible firms must maintain at least 75% of their normal staff levels to be eligible. There is as well a special project unit that is now being established in the Barbados Revenue Authority to help us better manage the payment of those refunds owed that I spoke to you about, the 131 million, and also to manage the applications to the $40 million loan facility that we're establishing under this program. I'll come to where the other $10 million from the catastrophe fund will go very shortly. We will also establish a $20 million small business wage fund administered by Fund Access for firms too small to be eligible for VAT or VAT refunds. We're really talking mainly about micro and small businesses. And this fund that we're establishing will now contribute $500 per month per employee up to 5 employees, where that employer is registered both at the Small Business Association, the Barbados Revenue Authority, and the National Insurance Scheme. And if you are not registered with them at this point in time, you need to do so before the 18th of May in order to be eligible for this amount of money. In short, you will be able to get $2,500 per month for 2 months to be able to assist with you with your payment of wages up to 5 persons for each month. The firm must commit to holding at least 75% of your overall staff. So whether you had 10 and you're down to 7 or 8, I don't think anybody's going to kill you if you come in at 70%. But we need to be able to help you at that point. And Fund Access has been told to have an open approach and to be responsible for advertising and managing the details along with the Small Business Association as to how your businesses will be able to access this fund over the course of the next week or 2. We will also develop a $200 million Barbados tourism facility to provide urgent working capital and investment loans to Barbadian hotels during the current period. Even as we work to diversify our economy to ensure that we have more global businesses operating from our country, and there are a number of discussions that we're going to have over the next few months as to how we restructure and repurpose this economy. But even as we do all of that, tourism will still be a mainstay in our economy. All different types of tourism, from the traditional sun and sea to medical and educational tourism as we've seen in recent years, from new visitors to repeat visitors to those from the diaspora who may be interested in more long-stay tourism and therefore are better suited in a post-COVID environment because of the tests that would be required once travel reopens. Many of our hotels equally are also in urgent need of working capital. Their revenues have disappeared overnight. Gone. Boom. Gone. They need support. In addition, some believe that now is the time for them to upgrade, expand, or to modernize some of their facilities so that they can return more profitably when things open back up than they were before. We also know that now is also a time when they cannot take on high interest rates or short repayment periods. It will simply force them into bankruptcy. Accordingly, the government is designing the facility to seek to offer attractive interest rates and repayment periods. It will focus also on lending for good development outcomes, such as job retention, hence a reference to working capital, such as links with local agriculture, conversion to renewable energy, and indeed the upskilling of the local staff that they have employed at the hotels. My friends, we are shareholders in the Inter-American Development Bank, and we are working with its private sector lending arm, IDB Invest, to work to establish this $200 million Barbados tourism facility. We will also encourage commercial banks, credit unions, and institutional and individual investors to participate in this facility by offering co-financing from the IDB and a 10% guarantee from our Tourism Loan Guarantee Fund. We recognize that while the scale of the solution needs to match the size of the challenge, so must the speed of the solution. Consequently, my friends, we are now working with Answer Merchant Bank to work with the government in the provision of bridging finance. The government itself will seed this facility with $10 million towards the bridging, as well as Answer for another $10 million, until such time as we can conclude our discussions with IDB Invest and other institutional and individual investors. We will publish the further details on the bridge financing in the very near future and on the full facility thereafter. I must tell you that I would not normally have mentioned this until we had fully completed the facility, but I recognize that we are well on our way to settling it, and that it is important that those in the tourism sector know that we are seeking to work with them at this most vital of moments. This will not replace the need for them to have access to private capital, whether it is debt from banks and other financial institutions, or equity from other investors locally and regionally. And believe you me, we need to start to learn to trust each other more and get more involved in equity for our hotels and for our direct tourism services, from attractions to restaurants, etc., without believing that we should have over leveraged firms that literally are struggling to survive. You know, there was a saying that Eric Williams once said that half a loaf is better than no loaf at all. And the simple message is, let us come together and use our capital together to build stronger businesses that can withstand this and other threats as we go forward. In addition to these new funds, last month I also announced that we have been in discussions with the banks on providing support to businesses and individuals impacted by COVID-19. I announced then an agreement that we had with the banks in Barbados that they had affirmed their commitment to working with their customers through these difficult times. In particular, the banks had then agreed to a 6-month payment moratorium on existing loans and mortgages for persons and businesses directly impacted by the pandemic, and 2, temporary working capital financing options for corporates and small businesses who are directly affected by COVID-19. We recognize that for many of the micro businesses, we would now be talking equally about the credit unions. The banks have reported that they have already given, in many instances, payment holidays to persons who need free cash flow during this difficult time. This is a report that I took from them earlier today, and similarly, that their credit card interest relief of up to 50% by some and payment waivers in other instances by others for 3 months has been pursued, with interest not capitalized but added thereafter to the balance, again allowing for cash flow relief for some of our businesses and individuals. Working with their existing corporate and small business clients, the banks are also seeking to offer, in some instances, in many instances, I'm told, overdrafts and other working capital support. And following the crisis for those who are still unemployed, after the 6 months have gone, not now, after the 6 months, banks will seek to work with their clients to restructure their loans to ensure as little disruption as possible for future cash flows of their clients. And finally, they are also working with us to be able to help, as I said, in the national agenda for growth by ensuring that they can work with those foreign and domestic investment entities who are companies who are interested in making investments in the country. I had also asked the governor of the central bank to meet with the banks, and I'm happy to report that he did so recently, given our concern on a disproportionate reliance on fees by the commercial banking sector. Why? Let me share with you. The revenue from fees at all of our banks grew from $78 million in 2008 to $126 million in 2018, while interest income for the same period of time declined from $637 million to $525 million for the same period. This is not a sustainable model for growth, nor does it reflect an energy in the interest of being able to make funds available to be able to provide the oxygen to fuel the growth in our economies. The governor has reported to me today that the banks have agreed in the first instance to 1, that there shall be no maintenance account fees for seniors, for persons who are senior citizens holding accounts. 2, that and I believe that this has existed in some banks before, so this is not new for all. 2, that there will be no over-the-counter charges for persons over the age of 70. 3, that there will be no maintenance account fees for youth accounts, and I've asked them to please indicate what they constitute or what criteria constitutes youth so that the public may be aware. The Governor has also indicated that achieving more concession requires additional dialogue, but that the issue now is timing, given the recent onset of the COVID-19 pandemic has obviously negatively impacted employment, and that this could in fact erode some household savings as clients withdraw balances to support their purchases to live as we go forward. Reduce bank charges on deposit accounts would therefore be helpful generally, and I've asked them to continue that discussion therefore with the banks. At the same time, I must tell you, the banks are legitimately concerned that their non-performing loans and provisions will rise, with the risk of increased write-offs if this crisis is prolonged. And the central bank therefore has indicated to me that it therefore proposes to require banks to ensure that all fees are easily accessible to all online, preferably through a clearly visible link on their homepage. Customers equally, they have indicated, must be notified by the banks of any changes in fees or any new charges via email or on other social media platforms, and I'm adding to that snail mail where necessary. Further, the central bank has also agreed that it will publish now every 6 months a comparison of fees bank by bank to make sure that customers are aware of their options. We need to work together to get out of this crisis. And this government's approach has been one that has seen us sharing the burden, as you know, and therefore we will not deviate at this point. We expect, therefore, that in addition to the funds which the government has created, businesses need to work with their banks and the credit unions to take full advantage of these measures. The most important thing, my friends, is to stay alive, to keep people's head above water, to tread water if you have to. For if you do so, when the country and world starts to open back, then you can resume the mission of building your lives and of us transforming our nation and improving generally the lives of all of our people. On the matter of utilities, I want to say before I end that I've asked the Director of Finance and Economic Affairs to meet with the utility companies, water, light, telecoms, natural gas, to see how best they can work with their customers with respect to their bills for April and May, given the disruption caused by the cessation of work and the imposition of the curfew. This is not easy, but we need to be able to make sure that we carry as many people with us. The final part of our economic program are the non-fiscal measures, my friends, part 5. And these are a number of things that we can do and must do that go simply beyond the issue of cash. I am referring to those things that don't necessarily cost immediate money, but are essential for persons and businesses to make money or save money. The first, of course, that affects every household is to continue to be vigilant for all forms of price gouging. I must tell you that I do not necessarily want to go back to the days of state supply of basic supplies. But if we have to go there in order to guarantee that every house in Barbados has access to food at affordable prices, then this government will not blink. It is against this background that the Ministry of Commerce must now drill down even further and look into retail prices versus wholesale and imported prices to begin to understand where the problems of increased pricing can truly be found, as we are seeing by persons in this day and age bringing forward their chits and receipts to be able to show the differences in prices over a short period of time. Secondly, we're asking all persons who have projects and financing but are simply awaiting approvals from Town and Country Planning for permission to please contact my office to the Permanent Secretary in the Prime Minister's office so that we may isolate these projects and have them fast-tracked for you, because as far as possible, we know that construction constitutes some of the safer activity that we can undertake in a post-COVID-19 environment, and we want to use this opportunity to rebuild and to repurpose a lot of the facilities that we have. It is consistent with our commitment to ensure that anything that can be carried out by persons who are least vulnerable to COVID and who have the appropriate protocols in their workplace to enhance safety can continue. Thirdly, the committee which we started last year to be able to reform how we do business in this country, chaired by myself, will expedite its work, and I expect a lot of progress over the next few months to ensure that we can reduce the bureaucracy and to eliminate many of the unfortunate rules and obstacles that prevent people from doing business in a seamless way. This will mean new systems, for example, for a national identification card. We will continue with that because it allows for a greater degree of activity to be conducted digitally for all of our citizens. If we had that now, we would be in a far better position than we are. It includes us establishing a new automatic clearinghouse as a public good for financial transactions. The encouragement in the use of digital money, essentially carrying Barbados to a new platform, a journey which we have started, but COVID-19 is now catapulting us into it at an even more rapid rate. My friends, we are all on the front line now. Don't fool yourselves. We are all on the front line. This is now the time when we need to be our brother's keeper and our sister's keeper. We may have to consider how best we can each carry some of the burden that is necessary to get our country and our families through safely. I have heard all of the conversations over the course of the last few weeks taking place about the cuts in salaries in the public and private sector that should be undertaken. I am moved by one simple point. If this does not move us now to help carry those who cannot carry themselves, at this point, what more will it take for us to help them? I am therefore requesting that we set up a subcommittee immediately of the social partnership to start the urgent conversation to determine how best those of us employed by the public service, and even the private sector in some instances, may contribute through mechanisms such as cash and bonds and all other ways to help offset this tremendous cost that the government of Barbados will have to bear to be the provider of last resort to many of our citizens and many of our businesses. And what do I mean specifically? If we were to isolate those who are earning $3,000 a month and below, whose income is already precarious, how best can the rest of us earning more agree to take a relatively small portion of our salaries in pandemic solidarity bonds to be repaid perhaps in a 3 or 4 year period or sooner, to allow us to support this extraordinary effort of helping to carry our brothers and sisters who have had their livelihoods ripped from them through no fault of their own. I'm not going to go further on this point at this stage, but I want every Bajan to sleep on this tonight and for the next few nights. My brothers and sisters, we have to agree that we must work together to guarantee food on the table of every single Barbadian household. For once we can do that, and once we have life, we shall meet again to do the larger and greater things that give us even greater excitement. Although I suspect that the last 5 weeks have taught us that the greatest gratitude and the greatest pleasure comes in the most simple things in life. So, yes, we will receive assistance from the IMF, from the CDB, from the Inter-American Development Bank, from the Latin American Development Bank, otherwise known as CAF. But that will not be enough even with the relaxation of the primary fiscal surplus targets that we've agreed with the fund in principle and that have now to go to their board to move from 6% to 1%, giving us an additional $550 million in additional space. But if you are going to lose $450 million in revenue, and if you have to repurpose a lot of your expenditure to support healthcare and to be able to support the vulnerable and to be able to support businesses that will go under if they don't get the support, then you can see it is a rough road we are traveling. But it is one, my friends, I know that we can get through. There were many who doubted that we could get through when we started at the end of May 2018. And we got us to that point. Regrettably, having had the experience, we now have to learn again and teach others that we can do it from start all over again. So we look forward to the results of the consultation. In short, the economic package I've announced tonight is unprecedented. Yes, it is. And as unprecedented as the grievous ordeal we have faced and will continue to face for a while, it is what it is. We are not alone in this fight. Because of our investment in international relationships, because of our commitment to work through issues from first principles, and because we've already had a commitment to work with our brothers and sisters in the international and regional community in a way that is caring and reinforcing. The supplies that I told you we got from Cayman Islands and Dominica, we continue to get support from CARFA, PAHO, and the WHO, for whom we thank now for agreeing to work with the Caribbean community in helping us to unlock some of these supply and logistics chains so that we do not feel as though we are working in the wild, wild west, just simply to get from swabs to testing kits to basic protective equipment for you, the frontline workers, to work in this world. You would have heard me earlier today speaking to Christiane Amanpour on CNN International and making a call for a global leadership initiative of not just heads of government across the world, but world leaders across different sectors with different interests, from Pope Francis right back through to others in the business community. After World War II, let me remind you, the world committed to a new world order and to new organizations to suit the needs of the time. The United Nations was formed 75 years ago. Many of the other organizations that we now call the Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF and World Bank, they too may have to look and see how, as they are doing, repurposing themselves. And I had an excellent conversation with the managing director of the IMF yesterday and with the day before yesterday, and with the president of the Inter-American Development Bank to see how best we can help change some of these rules. Because as you heard me say today, simply asking us to deal with per capita income to determine whether we can access loans or grants is not enough. That's like taking my blood pressure from 2 years ago and determining whether it can be used for me to determine whether you think I'm going to have a stroke tonight or not. It is completely irrelevant. It is completely futile. So we are asking the international community to recognize that we are on the front line with respect to the climate crisis. Hurricane season, my friends, starts in a month's time, 4 weeks' time. Get your act together. 2, with respect to high debt and low GDP. And in this regard, Barbados is now better than most because we have gone through the period and process of restructuring our debt, which has made us fitter to be able to meet this point in time, and also to have the natural disaster clauses, which I explained to you, will help the country even more than we're being helped now actually in this pandemic. And finally, that we also need now to face everything that this pandemic portends for us, from the cessation of business to the loss of life. That's why today I called on that program for moral leadership. Moral leadership that must extend from the household to the community, to the country, to the international community. Just as we know that you must take care of the least vulnerable in your household, we've got to do it in the community. Just as we know we must take care of the least vulnerable in the community, we must do it in the country, and we must do it internationally. And in the world, with some limited assistance by brothers and sisters across the world, in solidarity with each other, I'm telling you, we will only make this journey together. And that's why I say that we do not accept in this region that this region is both invisible and dispensable. And that is why our voices must rise together if necessary. But our voices must rise to be able to demand a just world, a level playing field, and a level of moral leadership that reminds us of the things that matter at the end of the day. We are not asking for simply handouts, but we ask for a helping hand and a level playing field. And I say to you, these are not just words. So it seems to me to be the settled view, after listening to everyone, from the health officials locally and internationally, that the challenges and risks posed by this virus may well be with us for some months to come, many months to come. This is now a new reality with which we have to live, and we can do so. As we embark on it, as we must, In this new phase of rebuilding our economy and our country, I urge you also to be purposeful, not inflexible, purposeful, as we seek to negotiate and successfully meet whatever challenges lie ahead. And the challenges do lie. I repeat, we're not out of the woods. The path we have chosen for the present has hazards, but it is the one most consistent with our character and our courage as a nation and as a people. Our goal is not to return the economy or to protect everyone. It's not one or the other. It is to do both. We will protect everyone, but we will also seek to transform and rebuild our economy and to make us fitter and stronger to face all that we must face going forward as a nation. We do so by isolating the most vulnerable among us and changing the way how we behave. And those conversations must take place at the level of families and communities, at the level of workplaces, and in the level of our country. At this time, to reimagine our development and where we must go, let us refurbish. Let us use the time to rebuild where we can, or to retool, or even to retrain just by going and seeing what we can learn that we didn't know before. Let us come back fitter and stronger. Let us commit as Bajans to be our brothers and sisters keepers such that we shall leave no one behind. And where possible, let us do our own part. Each of us, do your part to help us move forward. To those in our vulnerable groups who may be tempted to move around because you are not yet incapacitated, I beg you do. I beg you. Ensure that you can get help from others wherever possible and whenever it is offered. Do not take foolish chances. We are not seeking to take away your independence, but we are seeking more so to keep you safe. To the young people who want to socialize and meet up with your friends because you're bored at home, I urge you to bear with us for a little while longer as we continue to keep you and our fellow citizens safe. If you do the right thing, my friends, believe you me, and follow the directives and the protocols, your friends will still be there to hang out and socialize once we get over this hurdle. To our workers, I implore you to protect yourselves as you have been instructed in the use of personal protective equipment at all times, and also not to take your safety for granted. It is critical. As a courtesy to you and your colleagues, keep your safety evermost. And may I say at this stage that the new hours for the curfew will be from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. But within that context of 5 a.m. and 8 p.m., we expect as many of you to go about your business efficiently, expeditiously, and safely. So as we navigate these tempestuous seas, we must stay on course if we are to reach safe ground and to move into phase 3 and eventually phase 4. Any refusal to comply will cause us to run aground and set us back to where we started, a scenario that we can ill afford. We are only here tonight because we had a downward trajectory for the last 2 weeks generally. We had 73 cases in the first 5 weeks. We had 7 cases in the last 2 weeks. At no time has it been more pertinent for us to look after one another and to be each other's keeper. Above all, we must treat each other with high levels of empathy and kindness. This, I swear, is a winnable fight, but its winnability is based on our commitment to change our behavior in a way that we have never done before. It's hard for me. I know it's hard for you. But just as I can do it, I know you can do it too. And when we do it together, we can say that we have succeeded as one. So join with me and let us make that solemn commitment today, remembering always that with God on our side, we shall have no doubts nor fears. In the words we also know so well, upwards and onwards we shall go as we reopen our country, and greater will our nation grow in strength and unity. Stay safe, my friends, and above all else, God bless us. Thank you.